All right, today we're going to discuss lesson 3 about the separation of the Christian churches. So today, first of all, the first paragraph there is just a reminder to you that of what we talked about last time, that in the western part of the Roman Empire, it was called the Roman Catholic Church, based in Rome. And in the eastern part of the empire, or they comes to be known the Byzantine Empire, they become known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. And remember, there's also a difference in language, right? With the Greek being spoken in the East, and Rome is still speaking Latin, right? Okay. So let's talk about the Byzantine Church first. One of the major differences in the East is that they believed that their emperor was chosen by God, okay? And so they crowned their emperor in a religious ceremony. There's a very, everything is connected, right? The religion and the government are one, okay? So the emperor is also in charge of the church's funds. He appoints the leaders. He decides basically how the church should be run and even what people should believe. Okay, so very strong with the leader being religious and governmental. Okay, then and of course, right, in the West, we know that that's not the case, that there is the Pope is going to be the leader of the church, but not necessarily the government, right? Okay, one of the other major changes or differences that starts to develop is the issue of icons, okay? So icons in general, and you can even think of this for computers, right? That icons are like a picture that represents something else. So at this time, they originally meant that icons were religious paintings, usually showing, for in this case, probably Jesus or other saints or important people in the religion, okay? And that was common, that they were used in both sides, East and West, okay? Until there was a time period in which that wasn't true in the East, because one of the emperors of the Byzantine Empire, Leo III, he decided that he thought that having icons was kind of like idol worship. So he orders that all icons be removed from the churches. And a lot of it was very unpopular, that idea. It could have been partly because he was exposed to Muslim beliefs in his earlier part of his life. And so maybe, and that's one part of the thing, and we haven't talked about Muslim beliefs yet, but that is one of the things that they believe, that you can't even have a picture of God or Jesus, and there is it's a very, very strong belief. So maybe that influenced him. But for whatever reason, he thought that having these paintings of the saints and Jesus and everything was terrible. And he actually ordered that they all be destroyed. So the people who went out and destroyed them were called iconoclasts. And that word actually has continued on, although it has a slightly different meaning today. Today, when we say iconoclast, we're talking about someone who's going against any kind of traditional belief, not necessarily just religious, okay? All right, but at that time, it was these particular, getting rid of these icons, literally, okay? So that was very unpopular, and it damaged the relationship even more with the West. So not only are they separate, and they're also having some different beliefs in how they perform their religion. There's a thing about should bread be leavened or not, and should priests have to, can they get married or not, things like that. They were having some issues about practicing their religion differently. And then this one is a big one. Also, that use of icons was. And now what's interesting about this is that, like I said, it was very unpopular even on the East with his own people. And he basically forced his will on people. And what happens is over time, that kind of goes away. And today, they have icons again, right? It came back. Okay. All right. So anyway, so things are not going well between the East and the Western churches. Remember, we had mentioned earlier that the Pope in the West from Rome was going to say that he was the head of all the churches. And remember, he said the reason he thought so is because Peter was the one who originally made the church in Rome, and he was one of the original disciples. And so he has the strongest claim. And of course, remember that the East does not agree with that. They have their own leaders. The Patriarch of Constantinople, in fact, is also very strong, and they're saying, there's no reason why you should be in charge of us or higher up. Okay. All right. And then another issue that happened. So all these controversies are happening. And that is probably why when the Pope needs help, because Italy is getting attacked. And your book didn't mention it, but it was from the Normans, which you'll learn about later in high school, who they are, but they're like in the France area. They were getting invaded, Italy. And so the Pope asked the Byzantine emperor, right, his kind of counterpart in the East, for help, and he refused, partly probably because of these other disagreements they're having. That he didn't come to his aid. And so the Pope has to ask someone else to help defend him. So he asks a group called the Franks. And the Franks were Christian, right? And they came to help. And as a thank you, basically, the Pope named his king, the Frankish king, Charlemagne, and he crowned him as the emperor, which of course really angered the Byzantines because they think that they have the emperor in the East and they don't appreciate him like making another ruler, and it's this outsider, right? So that made the split between them even worse. And like I said earlier, there's also a lot of controversy in the West, right? Because the Pope is now getting involved in like government things, right? Trying to extend his power, not just in religious things, but by like crowning emperors and things. That's political issue. And the Pope is often trying to like assert his authority and having issues with the kings because he's trying to, control the governmental stuff. Whereas in the East, everyone agrees in the East that their emperor is in charge of everything. Okay. All right. And then, so finally, it's years and years of like conflicts and not agreeing on things. And then finally it comes to a head. And in 1054 AD, that's an important year, they finally separate. And this is called the Great Schism, or sometimes it's called the East-West Schism, or sometimes it's called the Schism of 1054. Whatever you want to call it, a schism is a separation. So in this case, it's like a major separation, right? And forevermore. And even today, right, there are two separate churches, even though their religion was originally the same, okay? And they have some differences for sure now, like I said, culturally, that they've kind of changed. So that what happened to cause this schism, this final parting, was that the Patriarch of Constantinople went ahead and excommunicated, basically kicked out the Pope out of his religion, and the Pope did the same to him. So it was like vice versa. So they both kick each other out and say, fine, we're totally separate. You're not allowed to, you don't belong part of my church anymore. And so it just made it official. So that was a really big thing in history. So all this is going on, and so you might wonder, why does Christianity continue to spread even though there's all these conflicts? Well, remember, there's also been that time where things have not been great, especially remember in the West where they kept getting invaded by the different Germanic tribes, right? And there's been a lot of warfare. And so the church is going to give them a sense of peace and security and a community, right? And so people flock to religion during really stressful times. So that's one of the reasons it spread. And then we should talk about these different communities that grew up. They actually started places for people to like dedicate their lives to their religion. So that was the beginning of monasteries. You've probably heard of that. A monk lives in a monastery. They live separately from people. They give up things. They try to perform good deeds, and they are like the kind of the example, right, of for the religion. Also, women also had their own religious communities, still do. My aunt is a nun and she lives in a convent, okay? And so again, they kind of live separately. And then they were given rules for how to act, these people who are going to dedicate their lives to their religion. So on both sides, they came up these rules basically for how monks and nuns should act. In the Eastern side, there was the Basilian rule, and that comes from a bishop named Basil, and so it's Basilian after him. And he was Greek, right? And so he was talking about how you should act and pray and rules and things for the people who are monks or nuns in the Eastern part, the Eastern Orthodox. In the Western part, they did the same thing. It's called the Benedictine rule because there was a monk named Benedict who came up with the rules. And Benedictine monks are known for giving up all material wealth, and that's still true today. Like my aunt that's a nun, doesn't have much of anything, right? She has very little. They're supposed to just dedicate their life to prayer and work for the community. So often, like my aunt is a teacher at a Catholic school, okay? And they're supposed to do whatever they can to help, right, spread the religion. One of the big things about the Benedictine rule is that the Benedictine monks were missionaries. They were supposed to go out and actually try to actively spread their religion. Oh, before I turn the page too, I should say that this picture right here is Charlemagne, if you didn't notice the caption that we mentioned earlier on the left-hand side. Okay, and also remember during those times of warfare and upheaval and everything, there are a lot of people who need help, and so it was known that monks would, give you a place to stay if you showed up at their monastery, and they would feed you and things like that. All right, and then this is the beginning of a lot of hospitals and schools that are run and still today run by monks and nuns. And they also did a lot to help keep Greek and Roman writings, ancient writings that were around. They kept them safe during warfare and things, so we have them to thank for a lot of that. Okay, and then your book starts just kind of going off on other things that it's important to know that's like thanks to Christianity. For instance, this whole section right here is about, the point is that there's something called the Cyrillic alphabet. And we have the Cyrillic alphabet because there was, there were two brothers, and they wanted to convert the Slavs, okay? And they thought the way to do that was to convert it to their language, right? Instead of trying to teach them in Greek, we should use their own language. So Cyril invented an alphabet for the Slavic language. So that alphabet is called the Cyrillic alphabet. And the reason this is important is because that is the basis for a lot of languages that are still spoken today, right? They use the Cyrillic alphabet for Russian, Ukrainian, Serb, Bulgarians. And of course, he was basing them off of what he already knew, like the Greek, original Greek, right? So I think they had over here on this page, if you want to see the how you can see it's kind of based on the same ideas. Okay. All right. And so that's still in use today. Okay. And the last thing is really quickly, they're trying to show you how Christianity spread so far. So really quickly, first of all, they talk about how Roman Empire was really big, remember, and they had people up in Britain, and eventually Germanic tribes came in and invaded Britain, and there was a particular group called the Anglo-Saxons that grew up in this area, and you will they're trying to get you to understand that the point is the reason it's called England today is if they're a group that lived there were called Anglo-Saxons, and then eventually that part, the southern part of Britain, became known as England, and then England became England eventually. So that's how it got its name, from the cultural group that ends up living there. Okay, so the English are there. Now they push out, the Anglo-Saxon people that live there, they push out the Celts. They go and they end up going towards like Ireland. And so that's why we see the spreading of Christianity to Ireland. There's Patrick, like St. Patrick's Day, right? He was a priest that gets a lot of credit for bringing Christianity there and setting up a lot of churches. And then later there is a pope in Rome, right, who purposely tries to spread the religion by sending monks to go actively spread Christianity throughout England. So that's how the Anglo-Saxons of Britain get converted. It helps that they are successful in getting the king to convert. So King Ethelbert of Kent, he was converted, and then of course once he's converted, then of course he allows a lot more to happen, churches be built, things like that. And so that's why Christianity takes hold in England. Okay, and of course Ireland too.